I'm Sophia Carter, 28, and I never thought my grandfather's death would tear my family apart. When his will was read, everyone's faces changed. My parents looked like they'd been slapped, while my aunts and uncles whispered in shock. Grandpa left his lake house and most of his estate to me, not them. 3 days later, I received court papers. My own parents were suing me. Before I dive into this family nightmare that changed everything, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy real-life family drama with unexpected twists, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about family betrayal and sweet karma. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. Growing up in Minneapolis, I was always known as the golden grandchild. It wasn't a title I asked for, but one that seemed to follow me like a shadow. My grandfather, Harold Carter, was a self-made businessman who built a construction empire from nothing. He had 3 children, my father Thomas, my aunt Claire, and my uncle Robert. While he loved all his grandchildren, he and I shared a special bond that began when I was just 5 years old. My parents were always busy with their careers. Dad followed in Grandpa's footsteps in the construction business, though he never quite reached the same level of success. Mom was a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. Their demanding jobs meant I spent many weekends at Grandpa's lake house in northern Minnesota, a stunning property on Lake Minnetonka that had been in our family for 3 generations. The lake house was where Grandpa taught me to fish, to identify constellations, and to appreciate the quiet moments in life. Sophia, he would say, as we sat on the dock watching the sunset, success isn't measured by how much money you make, but by how much joy you bring to others. He lived by those words, always generous with his time and resources. By contrast, my parents seemed obsessed with status and wealth. Our home in the suburbs was filled with expensive furniture that no one was allowed to sit on, and artwork purchased not for love but for investment. Family dinners, when we had them, were interrupted by business calls that couldn't wait. I grew up understanding that in our household, work always came first. My relationship with Grandpa only deepened as I got older. When I decided to study environmental science instead of business or real estate, as my parents had hoped, it was Grandpa who supported my choice. The world needs more people who care about something bigger than their bank accounts, he told me, slipping me a check to help with tuition when my parents threatened to cut me off. After college, I joined a nonprofit dedicated to preserving Minnesota's lakes and waterways. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was working to protect places like my grandfather's beloved lake, while earning a fraction of what I could have made in my parents' industries. My salary was modest, but the work fulfilled me in ways I knew money never could. Grandpa seemed proud of my choice, often asking detailed questions about my projects when we met for our monthly dinners. My parents, however, made their disappointment clear. "You could be making 6 figures by now if you joined the family business," my father would say with a dismissive shake of his head. My mother would add, "All that education wasted on saving fish." I learned to let their comments roll off my back, secure in the knowledge that I was living authentically. What I didn't realize was how deeply my parents resented my relationship with Grandpa. They saw every fishing trip, every long conversation on the porch, every proud smile he gave me as a personal slight against them. The tension came to a head at Grandpa's 80th birthday party. He had requested a simple family gathering at the lake house, but my parents insisted on a lavish catered affair with business associates and local dignitaries in attendance. It became clear that they saw the celebration not as a chance to honor Grandpa, but as a networking opportunity. When Grandpa pulled me aside during the party, and we spent an hour talking by the lake while everyone else mingled inside, I returned to find my mother fuming. "You always have to be the special one, don't you?" she hissed, the champagne on her breath, making me step back. "You have no idea how hard we've worked to keep this family's position in this community while you're out playing with your little fish friends." I was stunned by the venom in her voice, but I chalked it up to too much alcohol and the stress of hosting. I had no idea that this moment was just the tip of the iceberg, that beneath the surface of our family lurked currents of jealousy and resentment that would soon pull us all under. When Grandpa was diagnosed with heart failure a month later, everything changed. Suddenly, my parents became attentive, visiting him daily at the hospital and later at his home when he moved to hospice care. I noticed how they would shuffle me out of the room to have private conversations with him. At the time, I thought they were finally stepping up as his children. I didn't realize they were positioning themselves for what would come next. Grandpa died peacefully in his sleep, 6 months after his diagnosis. As we gathered to say goodbye, I looked around at my family, my father stoic and dry-eyed, my mother dabbing at tears that never seemed to fall, my aunt and uncle genuinely grieving, and I felt more alone than I ever had before. The only person who truly understood me was gone, and I had no idea how drastically my life was about to change. The reading of Grandpa's will was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday afternoon at his attorney's office in downtown Minneapolis. The sleek, modern building seemed at odds with my grandfather's down-to-earth personality, but he had always been meticulous about legal matters. Trust but verify, he used to say, a phrase I would soon understand all too well. I arrived early, dressed in a simple black dress that Grandpa had always complimented. "You look like your grandmother when she was young," he'd tell me, which I considered the highest praise. My parents arrived moments later, in matching designer morning attire, my mother's fingers adorned with rings that caught the fluorescent light of the lobby. My Aunt Claire and Uncle Robert followed along with their children, my cousins Emma and James. The attorney, Mr. Donovan, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of wrinkled face that suggested he smiled often. He had been my grandfather's friend for over 40 years, and the genuine grief in his eyes told me that their relationship had been more than just professional. "Thank you all for coming," he began, once we were seated in the conference room. Harold was a dear friend, and he put great thought into his final wishes. He shuffled some papers, cleared his throat, and began to read. The first few items were standard donations to his church and favorite charities, specific items of sentimental value to various family members. My father received Grandpa's collection of rare books, my aunt his vintage record collection, and my uncle his set of golf clubs. So far, everything seemed fair and expected. Then Mr. Donovan paused and looked directly at me. "To my granddaughter Sophia Carter, I leave my lake house property on Lake Minnetonka, including all furnishings and boats. Additionally, I leave her 60% of my remaining financial assets with instructions that she use these funds to continue her environmental work and to preserve the lake house for future generations of our family." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face as all eyes in the room turned to me. My father's expression hardened into a mask of disbelief, while my mother's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up in shock. My aunt and uncle exchanged glances that I couldn't read. Mr. Donovan continued, "The remaining 40% of my financial assets are to be divided equally among my 3 children, Thomas, Claire, and Robert." He went on to explain that this amounted to approximately 13.3% each, a far cry from the equal split they had clearly been expecting. My father was the first to break the silence. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "My father wouldn't have done this." Mr. Donovan shook his head gently. "I assure you, Thomas, this is exactly what Harold wanted. He was of sound mind when he updated his will 6 months ago." 6 months ago, my mother cut in sharply. "After his diagnosis, when he was on medication, this can't possibly be legal." The attorney's expression remained neutral, but his tone became firmer. "Harold underwent a thorough psychological evaluation before making these changes. Everything is in order, I can assure you." I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process what was happening. The lake house alone was worth millions, not to mention the 60% of Grandpa's considerable fortune that now apparently belonged to me. It was overwhelming, but even more shocking was the naked rage now visible on my parents' faces. "Sophia," my father said, turning to me with cold eyes, "I barely recognized you need to make this right. You know this isn't what should happen." Before I could respond, Mr. Donovan intervened. I should also mention that Harold left a letter explaining his decisions. He asked that it be read in private to Sophia, but given the circumstances, perhaps it would be beneficial for everyone to hear it now. He looked at me questioningly. Numbly, I nodded. I needed to understand Grandpa's reasoning as much as everyone else did. The attorney opened a sealed envelope and began to read, "My dearest Sophia, if this letter is being read, then I've finally gone fishing in that great lake in the sky. I've thought long and hard about my legacy, about what truly matters when all is said and done. The lake house has always been the heart of our family, the place where genuine connections happened, away from the hustle of business and social climbing that consumed so much of our lives. I'm entrusting it to you because you understand its true value. It's not just real estate. It's memories, it's peace, it's our family's soul. Your father and his siblings have always seen it as an asset, something to be leveraged or sold for profit. You see it as I do, as a sanctuary. As for the financial aspects of my will, I've watched with pride as you chose purpose over profit, compassion over competition. The money I leave you isn't a reward, it's a tool to help you continue the work that matters, to protect our natural world and to live with the authenticity that others in our family lost sight of long ago. I know this decision will cause discord. For that, I'm sorry, but I've lived long enough to know that sometimes, doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing. Stand firm, my girl. You have more strength than you know." As Mr. Donovan folded the letter, I felt tears streaming down my face. Grandpa had known exactly what would happen, had anticipated the fallout, and had tried to prepare me as best he could. When I finally found the courage to look up, my parents were already on their feet, gathering their things with sharp, angry movements. My father wouldn't meet my eyes, but my mother fixed me with a gaze so cold it made me shiver. "This isn't over," she said quietly, a promise rather than a threat. "You may have fooled him, but you won't fool us." They left without another word, leaving me stunned and confused. Fooled him? Is that what they thought, that I had somehow manipulated my grandfather? My Aunt Claire approached me, her expression conflicted. "Your grandfather loved you very much, Sophia," she said softly, "but this is going to tear the family apart." "I didn't ask for this," I whispered, still trying to process everything. "I know," she replied. "But that won't matter to your parents. You know how they are." As I left the attorney's office that day, clutching the keys to the lake house and Grandpa's letter, I had no idea just how far my parents would go in their quest for what they considered justice. I was about to learn that blood ties can sometimes be the easiest to sever when money is involved. 3 days after the will reading, I was at work analyzing water samples from Lake Minnetonka when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Is this Sophia Carter?" a formal voice asked. "Yes, this is she," I replied, still focused on the microscope in front of me. "Miss Carter, this is Richard Klein from Klein & Associates law firm. I'm calling to inform you that you've been served with a lawsuit contesting your grandfather's will. The paperwork has been delivered to your residential address." My hand froze on the microscope adjustment. "I'm sorry, what? Thomas and Elizabeth Carter have filed suit, challenging the validity of Harold Carter's will, specifically the portions regarding your inheritance. The documents outline their claim that undue influence was exerted during a period of medical vulnerability." The legal jargon washed over me, but the message was clear: my parents were suing me. Not just challenging the will, suing me personally, their own daughter. I left work early, driving on autopilot to my small apartment in uptown Minneapolis. Sure enough, a thick envelope waited for me, delivered by courier. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read the accusations against me. According to my parents, I had systematically isolated Harold Carter from his immediate family during his illness, creating a dependent relationship designed to influence his financial decisions. They claimed I had exploited a close relationship with the deceased to secure an unreasonable and disproportionate distribution of assets. The more I read, the more surreal it became. These clinical calculating words described a person I didn't recognize, a manipulative predator who had targeted a vulnerable old man. My own parents had painted me as a villain in a legal document that would become public record. I sank onto my couch, the papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. My phone lit up with a text from my cousin Emma just heard. "Are you okay?" I wasn't okay. I was numb, disbelieving, and completely unprepared for the battle ahead. The next morning I called Mr. Donovan. "They're saying I manipulated him," I said, my voice breaking. "They're making it sound like I'm some kind of elder abuser." The attorney sighed heavily. "I was afraid this might happen. Your parents visited me yesterday, demanding I testify that Harold wasn't of sound mind when he changed his will. When I refused, they made some rather unpleasant threats. What should I do? You need your own attorney, Sophia. This is a conflict of interest for me. I can recommend someone excellent, but this is going to get messy before it gets better." He was right. Within days, word of the lawsuit spread through our family and social circle. People I'd known my entire life suddenly viewed me with suspicion. My Aunt Claire stopped taking my calls. My Uncle Robert sent a terse email asking me to do the right thing and settle this quickly. Only my cousins Emma and James reached out with support, both confused by the family implosion. The attorney Mr. Donovan recommended was Jessica Patel, a sharp-minded litigator specializing in contentious probate cases. Her office was smaller than I expected, the walls lined with law books rather than impressive artwork. "Your parents have deep pockets and a lot of connections," she warned after reviewing my case. "They've hired Blackwell and Morgan. They're known for aggressive tactics in inheritance disputes." "I don't understand," I said. "They're already wealthy. Why go to these lengths?" Jessica leaned forward, her dark eyes serious. "In my experience, cases like this are rarely just about money. There's something deeper driving this pride control, old resentments. We need to prepare for a fight." And fight we did. The discovery phase was brutal. My parents' attorneys demanded access to every communication I'd had with my grandfather over the past 2 years. They subpoenaed my bank records, looking for evidence that I'd somehow benefited financially before his death. They even demanded my medical records, suggesting that I might have a history of manipulative behavior related to mental health issues. Jessica fought back fiercely, limiting the scope of their fishing expedition, and filing countermotions that highlighted my parents' own potential conflicts of interest. We discovered that my father's construction company had been struggling financially, and that he had approached Grandpa for a substantial loan just months before his death, a loan Grandpa had declined. We also learned that my mother had been pressuring Grandpa to sell the lake house to a developer who wanted to build luxury condos on the property. The potential commission would have been substantial, but Grandpa had refused, insisting that the lake house stay in the family. These revelations gave context to their anger, but they didn't make the lawsuit any less painful. What hurt most was how my parents weaponized our family history in their legal arguments. They painted my childhood closeness with Grandpa as something sinister, a calculated effort to position myself as his favorite. They described my choice of career as a deliberate attempt to align myself with his values while rejecting theirs. 6 weeks into the legal battle, I finally gathered the courage to visit the lake house, my lake house now, according to the will. I hadn't been there since before Grandpa's death, and I needed to connect with his memory to remind myself of why this fight mattered. The familiar gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the cedar-shingled house. It looked exactly as it always had: the wide porch with its rocking chairs, the stone chimney, the ancient oak tree with the tire swing. Grandpa had hung for me when I was 7, but something felt different. It took me a moment to realize what it was. This was now my responsibility to protect, not just a place I visited. Inside, everything was just as Grandpa had left it. His fishing tackle organized meticulously in the mudroom. The kitchen with its 1,970 appliances that he'd refused to update because they still work just fine, Sophia. The living room, with its wall of windows facing the lake, where we'd spent countless evenings playing chess or simply talking. I ran my fingers along the bookshelf, smiling at his eclectic collection: fishing guides next to philosophy texts, next to mystery novels. A leather-bound journal caught my eye. I didn't recognize it. When I opened it, I discovered it was Grandpa's private diary, started the day of his diagnosis. With a guilty pang, I began to read. The early entries detailed his thoughts about his mortality, his reflection on his life's successes and regrets. But as I continued, my heart began to race. Grandpa had documented conversations with my parents that I knew nothing about: tense discussions about the will, about the lake house, about me. Thomas and Elizabeth visited again today, one entry read. More talk about family legacy and fair distribution. When I mentioned my plans for Sophia and the lake house, Elizabeth suggested I might be too emotional about my decisions. Thomas hinted that Sophia might sell the property as soon as I'm gone, despite knowing how much she loves this place. Do they really know their daughter so little, or are they simply projecting their own values onto her? Another entry dated just weeks before his death: I've made my decision. The lawyers have been instructed. Thomas will be angry, Elizabeth furious. But I've watched them all my life, seen how money changed them, hardened them. Sophia remains untouched by that poison. She values what truly matters. The lake house will be safe with her, and the money will do good in her hands. I only hope they can eventually understand. The final entry hit me like a physical blow. I fear what may happen after I'm gone. Thomas has already threatened legal action if I don't reconsider. I told him that challenging my will would only reveal truths he might prefer to keep hidden. He backed down for now, but I know my son. This isn't over. I've left instructions with Donovan to help Sophia if the worst happens. God forgive me for leaving her to face this storm alone, but I believe in her strength more than she does herself. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Grandpa had known, he'd anticipated everything that was happening now. And there was something else, something about truths my father would prefer to keep hidden. What had Grandpa meant? As twilight fell over the lake, I sat on the dock where Grandpa and I had spent so many hours, the journal clutched to my chest. For the first time since his death, I felt a clarity of purpose. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about honoring his wishes, about protecting something precious from being commodified and destroyed. I called Jessica as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I found something, I told her. And I think it might change everything. The morning after finding Grandpa's journal, I met Jessica at her office, the leather-bound book tucked safely in my bag. The streets of Minneapolis were busy with morning commuters, everyone moving with purpose, unaware that my world had been completely upended. I envied their normalcy, their everyday concerns. This could be significant, Jessica said after I showed her the relevant entries. It establishes your grandfather's state of mind and his awareness of potential challenges to the will. But more importantly, it suggests there might be something else, these truths he mentioned. What do you think he meant? I asked, twisting my grandmother's ring around my finger, a nervous habit I'd developed since this ordeal began. Jessica tapped her pen thoughtfully against her desk. Did your grandfather keep a safe at the lake house, a filing cabinet, any place where he might have stored important documents? I thought about it. There's his study. He never let anyone in there when he was working. Said he needed a place where he could think without interruption. We need to search it, she said decisively. Today, if possible. If your parents are hiding something, we need to know before we proceed further. On the drive back to the lake house, I called my cousin Emma. We had always been close, despite the complicated dynamics between our parents. Can you meet me at the lake house? I asked. I could use a friendly face and an extra pair of eyes. Emma agreed without hesitation. By the time I arrived, she was already waiting on the porch, her red hair bright against the weathered cedar boards. She hugged me tightly. This whole thing is insane, she said. Dad and Aunt Claire are barely speaking to each other and no one will tell me what's really going on. Together, we entered Grandpa's study, a room I had rarely been in despite our closeness. It was exactly as I remembered, walls lined with bookshelves, a massive oak desk facing the window with a view of the lake, filing cabinets in the corner. Everything was meticulously organized, just like Grandpa himself. Where do we even start? Emma asked, looking around at the imposing collection of documents and books. I opened the journal to the last entry and read it again. Truths he might prefer to keep hidden. What would my father want to hide? We began systematically checking every drawer, every shelf, every possible hiding place. Hours passed with nothing significant to show for our efforts, just old tax returns, correspondence with business associates, fishing licenses dating back decades. Maybe we're overthinking this, Emma said, stretching her back after bending over file boxes. Maybe the journal itself is all Grandpa meant to leave. I shook my head. No, there's something else. I can feel it. As the afternoon light began to fade, frustration set in. We had been through every inch of the study and found nothing that could explain Grandpa's cryptic warning. I slumped in his desk chair, running my hands along the smooth wood of the desktop. He always said, the answers are usually right in front of us, I murmured more to myself than to Emma. As my fingers traced the edge of the desk, I felt a slight irregularity in the wood, a small indentation that didn't match the craftsmanship of the rest of the piece. Emma, bring that lamp closer, I said, suddenly alert. Under the direct light, I could see it wasn't an imperfection but a tiny deliberate, carving my initials SC, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I pressed the spot, and to our astonishment, a small panel in the desk slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a USB drive and a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope first. The letter inside was brief. Sophia, if you're reading this, then the situation has escalated as I feared it might. The drive contains documents I've been collecting for years, evidence of financial irregularities in your father's business dealings with my company. He doesn't know I discovered them. I never confronted him because I hoped he would make it right on his own. He didn't. This is your protection to use only if necessary. I'm sorry to burden you with this. All my love, Grandpa. Emma looked as shocked as I felt. What's on the drive? She whispered. We hurried to my laptop, inserted the USB, and began to go through the files. What we found was staggering documentation showing that my father had been systematically embezzling from Grandpa's company for years, using fake invoices from shell companies to funnel money into offshore accounts. The most damning evidence was a series of emails between my father and my mother discussing the scheme in explicit detail. They revealed not only the financial fraud, but also their plans to eventually take control of Grandpa's assets, including the lake house which they intended to sell to developers the moment he passed away. Oh my God, Emma breathed, her face pale as we scrolled through document after document. Uncle Thomas could go to prison for this. I felt sick to my stomach. This was worse than anything I could have imagined. Not just greed or resentment, but actual criminal behavior against his own father, and my mother had been complicit every step of the way. We need to call Jessica, I said, finally, closing the laptop as if I could somehow contain the ugliness we had discovered. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those emails, the cold calculations of people I had loved and trusted my entire life. I wondered if I had ever really known my parents at all. Had they always been this way, or had money and ambition corrupted them so gradually that they didn't even recognize the change in themselves? The next morning, Jessica reviewed everything with her team. "This is explosive," she said, her usual composure cracking slightly. "And it completely changes our strategy. Your parents won't want this made public. It would destroy your father professionally and could result in criminal charges." "What are you suggesting?" I asked, feeling unexpectedly conflicted. Despite everything, these were still my parents. The thought of seeing my father in handcuffs, my mother's name dragged through the mud, it gave me no satisfaction. "We don't go to the authorities yet," Jessica said carefully. "First, we request a private meeting with your parents and their attorneys. We show them what we found and offer terms. They drop the lawsuit, sign an agreement never to contest the will again, and in return these documents remain private." I nodded slowly. "And if they refuse?" Jessica's expression hardened. "Then we have no choice but to use everything at our disposal to defend you, including turning these files over to the proper authorities." The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at Jessica's office. I spent the weekend at the lake house, walking the property, sitting on the dock, trying to find peace amid the turmoil. I found myself talking to Grandpa in my head, asking him what I should do, how I could protect his legacy without destroying what remained of our family. On Sunday evening, as the sun set over the lake in a blaze of orange and pink, I made my decision. I would offer my parents one chance, one opportunity to do the right thing. Not just for me but for themselves, for our family's future. As I watched darkness settle over the water, I felt a strange calm replace the anxiety that had been my constant companion for weeks. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it with the strength Grandpa had always believed I possessed. I drove back to Minneapolis that night, the USB drive secure in my pocket, Grandpa's journal on the seat beside me. Tomorrow would change everything one way or another. I just had to trust that when I walked into that meeting, I would find the right words, the right path forward, through this wreckage of family ties and broken trust. Hey everyone, I know we're at a really tense point in the story. While I take a breath before facing my parents in that meeting room, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Has anyone else experienced family turning against them when inheritance was involved? Did you stand your ground or try to keep the peace? Drop your stories in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this family drama so far, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories with unexpected twists. Now let's see what happened when I finally confronted my parents with what I'd discovered. Monday morning arrived with a heavy downpour that matched my mood. The rain lashed against my windshield as I navigated downtown Minneapolis, my wipers struggling to keep pace with the deluge. It felt appropriate, somehow a cleansing storm before the confrontation that lay ahead. Jessica had arranged for us to arrive early to prepare. Her office felt like a war room, with documents laid out strategically, the USB drive's contents organized into clear, damning exhibits. She had even prepared a formal settlement agreement ready for signatures if my parents chose the path of least resistance. "Remember," she told me as we heard footsteps in the hallway, "stay calm no matter what they say. We have the upper hand, but losing your temper gives them an opening." The door opened and my parents walked in with their attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrison Blackwell, whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded him. My father looked thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. My mother's usual perfect appearance showed small cracks, her lipstick slightly smudged, her blouse missing a button. For a moment, seeing them like this, I felt a stab of compassion. Then my father's eyes met mine, cold and accusatory, and any softness I felt hardened into resolve. No one spoke, as everyone took their seats around the conference table. The silence stretched taut and uncomfortable until Jessica finally broke it. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," she began, her voice professional but firm. "We've asked you here today because we've discovered information that significantly impacts the lawsuit you've filed against Miss Carter." Mr. Blackwell leaned forward, his expression skeptical. If this is some kind of delay tactic, I assure you it's not. Jessica interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. Inside you'll find copies of documents discovered at Harold Carter's lake house. These are samples, only a small fraction of the evidence we now possess. My father opened the folder, my mother peering over his shoulder. I watched their faces carefully, saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. My father's complexion paling to a sickly gray, my mother's hand flying to her throat. This is, my father began, then stopped, apparently unable to find words. Evidence of systematic embezzlement from Carter Construction, over a period of approximately 7 years, Jessica supplied calmly. Wire transfers, falsified invoices, shell companies traced back to offshore accounts in your name. The full documentation has been duplicated and secured in multiple locations. My mother found her voice first. Where did you get this? She demanded, her eyes fixed on me with a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like respect. Grandpa knew, I said simply. He found out about the embezzlement years ago. He kept the evidence, hoping you'd stop on your own. If you think you can blackmail us with this, Mr. Blackwell began, but Jessica cut him off again. This isn't blackmail, this is a courtesy. Miss Carter has no desire to see her parents face criminal prosecution or public humiliation. She is offering you an opportunity to resolve this matter privately. She slid another document across the table, the settlement agreement. The terms are straightforward, Jessica continued. You drop the lawsuit against Miss Carter, sign a binding agreement never to contest Harold Carter's will again, and these documents remain private. Miss Carter will not pursue any criminal or civil action regarding the financial irregularities detailed in the evidence. The room fell silent again as my parents and their attorney huddled, speaking in urgent whispers. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. This was the moment of truth. After what felt like an eternity, Mr. Blackwell straightened and addressed Jessica in a noticeably more conciliatory tone. We'll need time to review the settlement agreement thoroughly. Perhaps a brief recess, Jessica nodded. We'll give you the room. 30 minutes should be sufficient. As we stepped out into the hallway, I finally allowed myself to exhale. They're considering it, I whispered. That's a good sign, right? Jessica squeezed my arm gently. It means they recognize they're in a difficult position. But don't celebrate yet, cornered animals can be unpredictable. We retreated to a small break room down the hall. I couldn't eat anything though, Jessica insisted I drink some water. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching like hours. When we returned to the conference room, I was surprised to find only my parents waiting. Mr. Blackwell was nowhere to be seen. We asked Harrison to step out, my father explained, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. We wanted to speak with you directly, Sophia, as family. I glanced at Jessica, who nodded slightly. I took my seat across from them, bracing myself. What you found, my mother began, then paused, choosing her words carefully. It's not as simple as it looks. It seems pretty straightforward to me, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. You stole from Grandpa for years. You betrayed his trust. And then you had the audacity to accuse me of manipulating him. My father leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on the table. The company was in trouble. Your grandfather refused to see it, refused to modernize, to adapt to changing markets. What I did, it was to save the family business. By stealing from it, I asked incredulously. How does that make any sense? I was going to pay it back, he insisted, a flash of the old defiance returning to his eyes. Once my investments matured, I would have replaced every penny. Your grandfather was stubborn, he wouldn't listen to my ideas, wouldn't take the necessary risks to grow the company. So you took matters into your own hands, I said. It wasn't a question. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. We never meant for it to go this far, Sophia. When your grandfather changed his will, leaving everything to you, It felt like a final betrayal. Like he was punishing us. He wasn't punishing you, I said quietly. He was protecting what mattered to him. The lake house should have gone to all of us, my father insisted. It's been in the family for generations. You never even showed interest in the business in carrying on the Carter name in construction. Why should you get everything? I took a deep breath, remembering Grandpa's words in his letter. Because I see the lake house as more than just real estate. Because I understand what it meant to him, what it means to our family beyond its market value. A heavy silence fell between us. I could see the conflict in my parents' faces, the anger and resentment warring with the reality of their situation. They were trapped and they knew it. What do you want, Sophia? My mother finally asked, her voice quiet. Beyond us dropping the lawsuit, what is it you really want from us? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge, justice. Neither felt right. Despite everything, these were still my parents. I want you to understand why Grandpa made the choice he did, I said finally. I want you to see the lake house the way he did, as something precious to be preserved, not an asset to be liquidated. And I want us to find a way forward that honors his memory without destroying what's left of this family. My parents exchanged glances. Some unspoken communication passed between them, the kind that comes from decades of marriage. The settlement agreement, my father said, turning back to me. We'll sign it. The lawsuit ends today. Jessica, who had remained silent throughout our exchange, spoke up. And the evidence will remain private, I assured them, as long as the agreement is honored. My father nodded slowly, a mixture of defeat and relief in his expression. We'll honor it. As Jessica went to retrieve Mr. Blackwell and finalize the paperwork, my mother surprised me by asking, the lake house. Will you keep it? Yes, I said, without hesitation. It's home. Something shifted in her face, then a softening around the eyes, the faintest hint of what might have been respect. Your grandfather would be pleased. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was perhaps a first step. The weeks following the settlement agreement brought a strange new reality. The lawsuit was officially withdrawn. The legal storm that had consumed my life suddenly dissipated. I found myself with the freedom to grieve my grandfather properly at last, without the shadow of litigation hanging over every moment. The lake house became my sanctuary. I took a leave of absence from the nonprofit, using some of my inheritance to fund critical projects in my absence. The rest of the money sat untouched in the accounts. Grandpa had set up a responsibility I wasn't quite ready to face. I spent those first weeks simply existing in the space that had shaped so many of my childhood memories. I slept in the guest room, unable to claim Grandpa's master bedroom as my own just yet. Each morning I had coffee on the dock, watching the mist rise from the lake as the sun broke over the tree line. Each evening I sat in his rocking chair on the porch, a ritual that somehow made me feel closer to him. Emma visited often, bringing groceries and company, when the solitude became too heavy. Dad asks about you, she told me during one of these visits, her voice careful. He won't say it outright, but I think he feels caught in the middle. How much does he know? I asked, wondering how much my parents had shared with their siblings. Not everything, I think, she replied. Just that there was a settlement. He mentioned that Aunt Elizabeth and Uncle Thomas have been acting strange, quieter, less combative. I nodded, unsurprised. The evidence I had against them was a powerful silencer. What did surprise me was the text I received from my mother 3 weeks after the settlement. It was brief, almost terse. Planning to donate some of your grandfather's clothes to veterans charity. Any objections? It was such a normal question, so mundane after everything that had happened. I stared at my phone for a long time before responding. None. It's what he would have wanted. Her reply came quickly. Yes, it is. Just 3 words, but in them I sensed an acknowledgement of Grandpa's character, of his values, and perhaps even of the rightness of his decision about the inheritance. The following Sunday, my father called. It was our first direct communication since the settlement meeting. His voice sounded older, more subdued than I remembered. "Your mother and I are cleaning out the house," he said, after an awkward exchange of greetings. "We found some photo albums you might want. Pictures of you and Dad, your grandfather, from when you were little." "I'd like that," I said, surprised by the gesture. "I could drop them off at the lake house," he offered hesitantly, "if that would be all right." I agreed, setting a time for the following day. After hanging up, I sat motionless on Grandpa's sofa, trying to process this unexpected development. Was it a peace offering, a strategic move, or simply a practical matter of passing along family mementos? When my father arrived the next day, he was alone, something I hadn't anticipated. He stood awkwardly on the porch, a cardboard box in his arms, taking in the familiar surroundings with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Nothing's changed," he said as I invited him in. "Dad always did say if it isn't broken, don't fix it." "Some things are worth preserving as they are," I replied, the words coming out more pointed than I'd intended. He set the box down on the coffee table, his eyes traveling around the living room, lingering on Grandpa's fishing trophies. The old chest set the wall of family photos that included many of him as a young man. "I haven't been here since before Dad got sick," he admitted. It brings back memories." "Good ones, I hope," I said, softening slightly at the nostalgia in his voice. He nodded, then gestured to the box. "There are 5 albums in there. Mom organized them chronologically. And there's something else, a watch Dad always wore when I was growing up. He'd want you to have it." I opened the box, lifting out a worn leather case. Inside was Grandpa's old Omega, the watch he'd received from his own father when he started the construction company. It had been retired to a drawer years ago when he upgraded to something more practical, but I remembered him showing it to me once, explaining its significance. "This should have gone to you," I said, looking up at my father. "He would have wanted you to have it." My father shook his head. "No, Sophia. Dad knew what he was doing when he changed his will. With everything." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't see it then, but I'm beginning to understand now." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. I accepted it for what it was, an olive branch, fragile but genuine. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered, surprising both of us. I was just about to make some. He stayed for an hour. Our conversation remained careful, circling around safe topics like the unusually warm fall weather and Emma's new job. We didn't mention the lawsuit or the embezzlement evidence. Those wounds were still too raw, the trust too freshly broken to address directly. But as he was leaving, he paused on the porch steps and looked back at me. "You're a lot like him, you know. Not just in how you look, but in here." He tapped his chest. "The same. I don't know. Steadiness. The same core." Coming from my father, it was high praise indeed. "Thank you," I said simply. He nodded once, then walked to his car. I watched him drive away, feeling something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. In the months that followed, a new pattern emerged. My parents and I maintained a careful distance, our interactions limited to occasional text messages and brief civil encounters at family events. My Aunt Claire gradually resumed our previous relationship, though a certain wariness remained. Uncle Robert was more forthcoming, inviting me to family dinners and making a point to include me in holiday plans. The wider family seemed to take their cues from this tentative détente, the whispers and sideways glances, gradually fading as the drama of the contested will receded into family history. I eventually returned to work, but with a different role. Using part of my inheritance, I established a foundation dedicated to preserving and protecting Lake Minnetonka and similar natural resources throughout Minnesota. Grandpa would have approved. I knew, using the money, not just to conserve the land he loved, but to create something sustainable that would outlast all of us. The lake house remained unchanged in its essentials, though I finally felt ready to make the master bedroom my own, packing Grandpa's personal items with care and respect. I kept his study exactly as it was, a private museum to the man who had shaped so much of who I had become. 1 year after Grandpa's death, I organized a small gathering at the lake house, a memorial of sorts, though not advertised as such. I invited the entire family, unsure who would actually come. To my surprise, almost everyone accepted, including my parents. The day was perfect early fall, with leaves just beginning to turn, and the lake reflecting a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. We gathered on the wide lawn, sharing food and stories as the sun made its lazy arc across the sky. Late in the afternoon, I found myself standing on the dock with my father, both of us gazing out at the water in companionable silence. "He loved this view," my father said, finally. "Said he could think more clearly here than anywhere else in the world." I nodded, remembering countless conversations with Grandpa in this very spot. "He told me once that the lake had all the answers if you knew how to listen." My father glanced at me, something like wonder in his expression. "He told me the exact same thing when I was a boy. I'd forgotten until just now." The moment stretched between us, filled with unspoken grief and regret, and perhaps a fragile hope for something better. "I miss him," I said simply. "So do I," my father replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. The breach of trust had been too profound for that. But it was a recognition of our shared loss, our shared love for the man whose absence had first torn us apart and now, ironically, was bringing us slowly back together. As the gathering wound down and guests began to leave, my mother approached me in the kitchen where I was wrapping leftover food. "The place looks good, Sophia," she said, glancing around the familiar space. "You've taken good care of it." "I'm trying," I replied honestly. She nodded, then seemed to come to a decision. "Your father and I have been talking. We have some old photos of this place, from when it was first built, from your great-grandparents' time. We thought you might like to have them. For the house." I recognized the gesture for what it was, not just a practical offering of historical artifacts, but a symbolic acknowledgement of my rightful place as the lake house's caretaker. "I would love that," I said. "Thank you." As twilight settled over the property and the last guests departed, I stood on the porch watching the lights from houses across the lake begin to twinkle on. The inheritance that had caused such strife had brought unexpected gifts as well, not just financial security or property, but hard-won wisdom about family loyalty and the complex legacy we all navigate. Grandpa had known this would happen, I realized, not the specific path we had taken perhaps, but the eventual reckoning, the painful but necessary reassessment of our family's bonds and values. He had trusted me to weather that storm, to find a way forward that honored what mattered most. Standing there in the gathering darkness, I felt his presence more strongly than I had since his death, not as a ghost or a supernatural visitation, but as an enduring influence, a voice of principle and compassion that had become part of my own inner compass. "I'm doing my best, Grandpa," I whispered to the night air. "I hope that's enough." The breeze from the lake seemed to wrap around me in response, gentle and reassuring, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt truly at peace. 2 years after Grandpa's death, the lake house has become not just my home but a gathering place for family once again. The wounds haven't fully healed, some scars run too deep for that, but we've found a new equilibrium, a way to move forward with cautious hope. My foundation's work has expanded, protecting not just Lake Minnetonka, but watersheds across the state. I often think of Grandpa when we secure a new conservation easement or complete a successful restoration project. His legacy lives on not just in the wealth he left behind, but in the values it now serves to uphold. My parents and I maintain a careful relationship built on new boundaries and hard-earned respect. We may never recapture the easy closeness some families enjoy, but we've found something perhaps more valuable: honesty, however difficult, and a commitment to doing better moving forward. The journal Grandpa left me sits on my nightstand. I read it often, finding new wisdom in his words, new understanding of the man who saw so clearly what truly mattered in this life. In the end, what I inherited wasn't just property or money, it was a responsibility to uphold something precious, to protect what deserves protection, and to stand firm when it matters most. Some legacies can't be measured in dollars. Some inheritances transform us in ways we never expected. Wow, what a journey this has been to share with all of you. I'd love to know if any of you have experienced family conflicts that eventually led to healing or important life lessons. Has karma or justice played out in your family dynamics? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found value in my story, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life family dramas with unexpected twists. Thank you for being here with me through this emotional roller coaster. Your support means everything. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's in the will, but the wisdom we gain along the way.